It's the year 1793 and business is booming here in the Pennines. Huge mills have sprung up all over the place, especially where fast water can power the heavy machinery. Our Pennine mills need better transport systems so we can fetch wool from even greater distances like Lincolnshire and Leicestershire and send out our finished cloth to ports like Hull and Liverpool for export. Canals, that's the answer, they said. Everyone's building them. Canal mania, they're calling it. At a meeting in Marsden, there was talk of a new canal from Ashton to Huddersfield. It had formed the shortest route from east to west and passed right by my mill at Winnell. They'd have to cross the moors at Standedge, mind. An impossible dream, some say. Standedge might be the shortest route across the South Pennines, but it'd be a fair crack for a pack horse, let alone a canal boat. In the road up, enthusiasm won the day, and a gent called Brown was asked to survey the route. Turns out the canal's not going to cross over the top of the moors, but beneath it, through a great long tunnel, no less. No one's ever built a tunnel like it. It'll be the wonder of Britain, and right on my doorstep. A young gent called Benjamin Outram was recommended as engineer on account of his experience with other tunnels. He costed the canal at almost £179,000 and said the line, described in every respect, is most practicable and forms the shortest communication between Manchester and the eastern navigations. Of course, when they drew up more detailed plans, the cost rose. It's over 182,000 now, with the tunnel alone exceeding 55,000 and expected to take 5 years to build. Still, Parliament has agreed the plans and authorised the construction of the canal. Mr. Benjamin Outram has been appointed as consultant engineer on 3 guineas a day and will report directly to the committee when required. Young Mr. Brown will be expected to supervise the day-to-day works on site for an annual salary of £315. For my part, I only hope the young lad's up to the job. The Huddersfield Canal Company has been established, and as a respected local businessman and mill owner, I've been asked to join the committee. I'm even going to put my own money into the venture, as will other local businessmen who are bound to gain by it. Oh yes, this new canal with its grand long tunnel will transform our lives here. That's for sure. It turned out that the 1790s was not a good time to start building a canal. England was engaged in trying to crush that upstart Napoleon and his new French Republic. Taxation had risen sharply to pay for the war. Inflation is rampant, and the cost of everything for building the canal is rising like floodwater. The committee's tried to save costs. I mean, we've told Mr. Brown that he's to make do on his own, because we can't afford any more engineers. If he wants them, he'll have to pay for them out of his own pocket. Not that he's making proper supervision anyway. I mean, shocking the work, some of it, badly done, poorly planned. So we've halved his pay and told him to make cutting of the new tunnel his most urgent priority.
Well, we dig the tunnel just like we're digging a mine. First, them gentlemen surveyors, they pegged out a line across the top of Pool Hill, using poles, all set out by eye.
And the levels were transferred right across the moors, using benchmarks and clever instruments. This in account that the water would flow out the tunnel like a tip to post trough if it weren't proper level.
Aye, when all were measured correct, we was told to strike hard at both tunnel ends. Some of the lads, they started digging construction shafts straight down from top at moors along the line at tunnel.
The company makes them live and sleep up at Redbrook and Gilbert's Intake and elsewhere. Come all weathers.
Aye, true words, Tom.
And we're wives and babes, so as not to make delays and loss of time. So company says. You know, I'm working both day and night.
Quite. So, once he was told that the shaft was at the exact depth, lads would strike out on the level in each direction towards tunnel ends according to plummets from the top. Part ways down, drain or adit may be driven sideways away from construction shaft and at a quarter turn from the tunnel below. They maybe have about 4 drains along the length of each adit, so to take groundwater away from main workings and give drainage to the water engines, which were used to take spoil away.
As God's my witness, George Stark, 31 construction shafts were started, 14 alone to dig the tunnel, and yet 17 more for means of drainage.
Aye, son, and each dug by hand, by blood, by sweat, by tears, prayers and the light of a candle, using picks, shovels and gunpowder. We strike an auger so as to make a neat hole in middle at face for blasting. We dry out the hole, we pack it full of gunpowder and we seal it up tight, from wet using clay. Fuse lighted, we're at once away at a distance which we reckon to be out of harm.
And the lads in the deep construction shafts were simply lifted out, clinging one above the other on a winding rope.
No, but they drop them back down soon enough into the smoke and the fumes once the charge has been fired, on account of, well, time's not to be wasted and such, because we're paid by length and depth.
Me, my husband and the nippers all live in workers' cottages at Redbrook on top of the moor. Young Thomas is growing so fast. Takes after his father, he does. My husband, John, he's mining the tunnel, in charge of blasting. I worry for him. Blasting's tricky work. Judging the state of the rock or the size of the gunpowder charge needed is a devil of a job. Men gets maimed, or even killed sometimes if things are misjudged. I'd rather stick up here in the daylight any day. Why, 2 men, George Spark and Thomas Whitehead, decent fellas, well liked, were killed not long since by a blast gone awry. Upwards of 1,000 people attended the funeral. I supervised the raising and lowering of the barrels and buckets of what they termed water balance engines to fetch the blasted rock and spoil topside. Well, that and looking after our young uns. A heavy barrel weighted with water is sent down a balance pit alongside the main shaft. As it drops, it lifts the spoil from deep in the workings by way of pulleys and gears. Upon reaching the bottom of the balance pit, the water is tipped from the barrel along the drains, and being lighter, it comes straight back up. The committee says pumping cost at the shafts is too high, more so than Mr. Outram worked it out at, which is blamed on the large amount of groundwater in the rock. To save itself £11 a week or more, the company has taken down the Chesterfield steam engine here at Redbrook and put this water balance engine in its stead. Some shafts is awful flooded, and Heathy more than most. Looks fit to be abandoned, the men say. Works have fallen far behind on the tunnel, and several contractors have either walked away from the job for fear of losing money or were sacked. You can't blame them. What with the company sometimes only paying men 5 shillings in the pound on account of lack of funds. It's a disgrace. Mind, news isn't all bad. Progress is made on the main body of the canal, and a pack horse route for goods across the top of Standedge now connects the 2 ends of the canal. But it's hardly the major Pennine Canal crossing that all had hoped for.
Back in February 1799, we on the committee decided to withdraw Mr. Brown's contract on account of his failings, and Mr. Outram offered to take charge, good and proper. Just as we were considering Mr. Outram's offer, a most disastrous flood following heavy summer rains caused extensive damage along the length of the canal and flooded the village of Marsden. Mr. Outram was most quick to withdraw his offer, I can tell you. With our money running out and no engineers, work on the tunnel all but stopped. To say nothing of having to make good the flood damage, made worse by the original poor workmanship. Mr. Roos, a merchant from Manchester, did, however, begin to bring some order to the company's affairs. He worked most diligently to bring in toll money from the working sections of the canal and to collect unpaid shareholders' money. This canal was never going to be a success, though, while the tunnel remained uncompleted. Mr. Ruth even had the tunnel levels checked and found to his horror that the entrance at Diggle was higher than at Marsden, and that the Marsden end was being cut downwards. We had to raise yet more money, this enterprise now costing almost twice as much as the original estimate, and we took it upon ourselves to seek the most professional advice to be had, that of Mr. Thomas Telford, to put these sorry affairs into decent order. Mr. Telford advised us that, in his informed opinion, the tunnel could be completed by December 1810, but at an additional cost of £45,000. 45,000, I say. We set our course, and Mr. Ruth was instructed to follow Mr. Telford's detailed report to the very letter. And praise be, in June 1809, Mr. Ruth reported, the tunnel is perforated and the lines and levels agreed. Mind you, it was another 18-month hard grind before the tunnel was in correct order for boats to journey through. And that was almost exactly to the day that Mr. Telford calculated at that. Nothing in the construction of this canal or the tunnel at Standedge has been easy or predictable. Why, only days before the first boat travelled the length of the tunnel by way of testing it for use, the reservoir at Black Moss gave way and water flooded into Marsden for the second time. This black flood destroyed mills and homes, and 6 people lost their lives. James Haig lost 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and Mrs. Barmforth was swept away from Horsfield's Mill, her body only to be found some time later, most of the way to Huddersfield. However, on April the 4th, 1811, 17 years to the day since the first Act of Parliament, a mighty crowd of 10,000 people gathered at Diggle to watch myself and several hundred dignitaries board a fleet of boats to travel through the tunnel. We were accompanied by a band who played Rule Britannia and patriotic songs. Oh, what a sound they made. We of the Huddersfield Canal Company have completed the most stupendous piece of work of its kind. We have literally surmounted a mountain of difficulties to construct a canal 19 3/4 miles long with 74 locks passing through 2 remote Pennine valleys, connected by the highest, longest, deepest canal tunnel in the kingdom.
Standedge Tunnel is the highest canal tunnel in Britain at 645 feet above sea level. 3 miles, 135 yards long, it is the longest canal tunnel ever to be built in Britain, and it is the deepest underground at over 638 feet below the surface of Pure Hill. The tunnel and canal saw trade increase in the 30 years after it was built, and it even started to make modest profits. But the shareholders never got back the money they had invested. Some local mill owners profited from the increase in trade, but others, like John Ploughs, who had chaired the first canal meeting in Marsden, went bankrupt. It was the coming of the railways that put an end to the great age of the canals. In 1845, Standedge Tunnel was bought by the Huddersfield and Manchester Railway Company. They used the canal tunnel to help them build a new railway tunnel by digging connecting passages between the two and removing the rock and spoil by boat. The canals were not able to compete with the new and faster railway network, which could deliver goods far more quickly. By 1938, the canal was no longer in use, and in 1944 it was finally closed. It became nothing but a series of filthy, unconnected pounds filled mainly with rubbish. Some sections had been built over and destroyed completely. In 1974, us enthusiasts, horrified at the state of the canal, got together and formed the Huddersfield Canal Society with the dream of returning the canal to working order. Not everyone shared our enthusiasm. We were told there was simply no chance of restoring it. Not to be thwarted, they set about holding meetings, writing letters, and generally bothering anyone and everyone who'd listen into supporting the scheme. It took the Huddersfield Canal Society 10 years, but eventually they got everyone, British Waterways and the 5 local councils, round the same table and persuaded them to set up a joint committee to get the job done. Things then began to motor. There were boat trips and festivals and plays, like Where's Our Cut by Micron Theatre, and working parties. And with all this hard work, money slowly started to roll in. The cheque from Greater Manchester Council for £1.2 million was a sight for sore eyes. But we didn't stop there. We were going to fight for this all the way. We had now the full support and financial backing of British Waterways and the 5 local councils. We needed millions to really get the job done. And it was the Millennium Commission that came up with the goods. Nearly £15 million, in fact. Standedge Tunnel was probably in better condition than most of the locks and was basically sound, even if some bits of the roof could be brought down with a sneeze. There was just so much of it, over 3 miles. Oh, it's perfectly safe now. Any loose bits are held up with rock bolts and concrete, and British Waterways checks it. In 2001, all our hard work paid off. Prince Charles came on the royal train to Marsden and officially opened the canal and tunnel. I like to think our dream of returning the canal to working order provides a fitting tribute to all those navvies and their families who lived on the moor, and the pioneer and engineers who 200 years ago dreamt the impossible.